After that, and this actually, just the following year, I got invited to go to Zagreb in what was still Yugoslavia at the beginning of '91 in Croatia, and to make an exhibition. I thought, well, okay, because things were heating up there. I had friends from there, and that's why I was invited to make an exhibition at the museum. And I said, things are heating up in Yugoslavia. It was pretty clear in early '91 that things were going to break up. And so the question is, how would they break up? You know, the way they normally break up is through violence. You know, war, or civil war, or whatever you want to call it. Violence is the way these political separations very often happen, and in this case it was almost predetermined. I said, well, what if we could use architecture, a form of space and design, to open up a kind of other direction for how it could break up, because it was going to break up. So these plans of Zagreb, we see these concentric kind of circles are just points of energy that have to do with the structures. At the bottom, again, you can see this kind of strange shapes structure standing in the street. It's not in a building now. It's not hiding. It doesn't have to be secret. It can be out in the street. It has to be out in the street, because the street is where people are going to be talking about the future of their country, the future of their society. You know, because they're also changing from socialism to something else. Communism, whatever you want to call it, it was really a socialism, but it's going to change into what? What kind of capitalism is it going to become? Is it going to try to copy the West, you know, Germany and England, France, whatever, or are they going to try to develop their own kind of new economic and social structure? So I said, we should, almost like phone booths, we should bring in these structures with military helicopters, which they had, and we could take them and drop them into the streets, where they would either, you know, they could bridge across the street, you know, and again provide this new kind of space, this space where you can't think, oh, now I'm sitting in the former royal palace. Think of what happened to the French Revolution. I mean, the French Revolution was defeated by imperial French architecture, because all these people are trying to build an entirely radical new society in that old architecture, and the architecture won. You know, it did. It actually won. You know, because within a few years we had monarchy, or not we, but they had monarchy again, because the revolution fell apart. People got too much thinking that they were the next monarch, Robespierre and others. But anyhow, so these structures become temporary structures in the streets that provide space plus communications capsules inside to set up an intense dialogue about change and transformation. Well, of course, what happened in Yugoslavia was that there was war and violence. All of these, you know, kind of naive ideas of myself and others for somehow making instruments of a different kind of creative transition just turned into violence. And this is a view of Sarajevo in 1992, when the Serb army surrounded the city and began to shell it. NATO, fortunately, had told the Serbs they couldn't use their aircraft to bomb, or they would be shot down. In fact, during that period, a number of Serb jets that took off to come and bomb were shot down by NATO fighters. But other than that, NATO left the army with its artillery and mortars free to just torture Sarajevo for 3 years, more than 3 years. Killed 10,000 civilians by sniper fire, mostly, but also destroyed a lot of architecture, a lot of buildings, and of course it raised the question of how do you rebuild these buildings? I wanted to make a comment about that. Is in that particular image, you know, these has an eerie resemblance to the Twin Towers in New York. Certainly not as tall, but these were two twin towers built for the '84 Olympics in Sarajevo, the Winter Games. And, you know, they were symbols of modern Sarajevo, of a progressive city, etc. And they were the targets because they were symbolic. The invaders, who were, again, Serb Christians invading Bosnian Muslims, in this case, wanted to destroy the urban quality of Sarajevo. They wanted to destroy the idea that this was a civilized place. They wanted to reduce it to rubble, to prove, you know, its inferiority. For me, this was a difficult thing to contemplate. I mean, I'd been to Sarajevo just before the war in '91, meeting with architects there, talking about the future and so on. And again, there was a kind of rosy glow and all my optimism about how we could be innovative and facilitate change. I was thrown into a deep depression about that, the fact that it didn't happen, and the fact that destruction and war came. So one tool of thinking for me is drawing. Not only a tool of design, but it's a tool, I mean, when I make a drawing, it's about thinking. So I made a series of drawings. I just, you know, maybe you couldn't think of a better thing to call them except meditations on ideas of creation and destruction. And I began to think about destruction, much the way I'd earlier thought about decay, but I thought about destruction as really being part of a cycle of creation. So sometimes you have to destroy something to create something. And certainly to build a house, you have to cut down some trees. You know, you've got to destroy a part of nature to make a building. Or you have to destroy an older building to make a newer building. And then you disrupt people's lives who are living in the former building, etc. So there's a strong destructive aspect to architecture, period. And in the case of a war situation where violence actually occurs, one has to begin to think differently about these things, about creation and destruction and their relationship. So again, my drawings were exploring the ideas of a kind of fragmentation, kind of, not explosion, but things becoming unhitched from each other, in a kind of field condition, a kind of general field, like things blowing in the wind. And at some point, you know, these are just various drawings I was making, and this is in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, but actually in the earlier part.
Is it still pre-9/11?
Yeah, this is all pre-9/11. This is like 8 or 9 years before 9/11. But it was happening in Sarajevo. The one thing that, you know, I don't know if you remember George H.W. Bush, the president who invaded the Gulf War. Not the present one who invaded Iraq, but in Afghanistan. But he was talking about a new world order. That was a kind of catchphrase. I don't know who invented that idea of a new world order. Certainly sounded scary. But what the New World Order really was, it turned out to be, was the fragmentation of the former big blocks, the superpower blocks, into smaller groups, units who were then political units that were able to quarrel, like Yugoslavia was able to break up, you know, once the wall came down. It could never have broken up before, you know, Germany was reunited, and when there was still a Soviet Union, or the United States as a particular kind of superpower.